The United States federal government once punished the Ford Motor Company by court order, forcing it to buy spark plugs from one of its own competitors for 5 years in quantities equal to half of every plug installed in every Ford vehicle sold in America. The government made Ford pay a rival to fight Ford. Ford was also barred from manufacturing spark plugs anywhere in the United States for a decade and banned from putting its own brand names, including Motorcraft, on any spark plug sold in the country for 5 years after that. All of it triggered by one ordinary orange and white ceramic spark plug called Autolite. This is how Ford, one of the three most powerful industrial corporations on earth, ended up on the losing end of the strangest corporate punishment in American antitrust history, and why the brand the government fought so hard to save no longer exists today. 2 boxes of Autolite spark plugs on the same workbench. The left box, mid-1960s, small print reads, "Made in Fostoria, Ohio, USA." The right box, from a store shelf today. Fostoria is gone from the label. The country of origin is gone with it. And there's a third box that isn't on this table because it doesn't exist anymore. Earlier this year, First Brands Group, the current owner of Autolite, formally announced it was winding the brand down. No buyer found. The Fostoria plant, the exact piece of physical property the Supreme Court had once ordered Ford to divest to keep this brand alive, had already been closed and sold off years earlier. 1,400 jobs at its peak, 60 on the day the lights went out. To understand how the United States government once treated this small ceramic plug like a national security threat, you have to go back more than 100 years. To a lamp company in Toledo, Ohio, and to a strike that killed 2 people. Industrialist Clement O. Miniger partners with inventor Artemus W. Fisher and founds the Electric Autolite Company. The original product isn't glamorous. It's generators and lamps for early automobiles, the electrical guts of the horseless carriage, and then in 1934, something happens that tells America exactly how big Electric Autolite has become. 10,000 workers walk off the line. Company guards move in, local police follow, and finally, 1,300 soldiers of the Ohio National Guard are deployed to the streets of Toledo. Over 5 days, guardsmen fire live rounds into a crowd of strikers and onlookers. The Autolite strike is now taught as one of the 3 great strikes of that year that made the modern American trade union movement possible. This was Electric Autolite, big enough that when its workers walked out, the National Guard rolled in. 1 year later, company president Royce Martin decides the generator business isn't enough. Autolite needs to make spark plugs. A ceramic engineer named Robert Twells is put in charge of the R&D lab. In 1936, the first Autolite spark plug rolls off a brand new production line in Fostoria, Ohio. In a country with 3 real spark plug companies, GM's AC brand, Champion of Toledo, and Autolite, Autolite became the everyman's brand. Chrysler put them on Plymouths and Dodges, Studebaker, Packard, and eventually Ford. By 1960, Autolite is the second largest spark plug company in America, which is exactly why Ford decides to buy it and exactly why the United States government decides to stop them. Ford's logic was straightforward. Ford was already the largest single buyer of spark plugs in the United States, purchasing from Champion, from Autolite, from AC. Ford's own engineers had run the math. Building a spark plug division from scratch would cost more and take 5 to 8 years longer than buying one that already existed. For roughly $28 million, Ford received the Autolite trade name, the Fostoria plant, a battery plant in Owasso, Michigan, distribution rights, and the personnel who knew how to run it all. The acquisition closed in 1961. Ford didn't calculate one thing. The Justice Department sued on 2 grounds. Ground 1, market foreclosure. Ford wasn't just any customer. Ford was the single largest customer independent spark plug makers had, purchasing from Champion, from Autolite, from AC. The instant Ford bought Autolite, every other independent, most importantly Champion, lost access to Ford's business overnight. A door slamming shut and calling that competition stopped being credible. Ground 2, subtler. As long as Ford was a plausible threat to enter the spark plug market on its own, that threat kept prices in check. Every plug maker in America knew that if they charged too much, Ford would just build its own. By buying instead of building, Ford eliminated itself as that threat. And that, the government argued, hurt competition in a second invisible way. But hold on. If this were a simple story of monopoly and greed, the courts wouldn't have taken 11 years to argue about it. Ford's defense wasn't crazy. Ford argued that the acquisition made Autolite a stronger competitor against Champion and AC because Autolite now had Ford's engineering behind it, Ford's distribution network, and Ford's OEM guarantees. And the district court itself found that Autolite before the acquisition was small, undercapitalized, and losing ground. March 29th, 1972. The Supreme Court, in an opinion written by Justice William O. Douglas, affirms that Ford's acquisition of Autolite violated Section 7 of the Seller-Kefauver Anti-Merger Act, and divestiture is only the beginning. The 4 terms Ford was told to obey. In black and white. 1. Divest the Autolite trade name and the Fostoria spark plug plant as a single unit to a buyer approved by the Antitrust Division. 2. For 10 years from divestiture, Ford is enjoined from manufacturing spark plugs anywhere in the United States. 3. For 5 years, Ford shall purchase from the buyer of the divested Autolite assets at least 1/2 of Ford's total annual spark plug requirements at competitive prices bearing the Autolite trademark for use in every Ford vehicle sold in America. 4. For 5 years, Ford shall not use, market, or import into the United States any spark plug bearing a trade name owned by or licensed to Ford. That covered Motorcraft, Ford's own house brand. The Ford Motor Company was legally forced to keep its old rival alive with Ford's own money for 5 years while banned from competing with that rival for 10, which made Ford one of the only corporations in American history ever ordered by a federal court to subsidize its own competitor. In August 1973, Ford sold the Autolite trade name and the Fostoria plant to the Bendix Corporation for approximately $29 million. A practical wash on the $28 million Ford had paid 12 years earlier, minus 12 years of investment. The government had saved Autolite. 10 years after Bendix bought Autolite, Allied Corporation absorbed Bendix. Then Allied merged with the Signal companies to form Allied Signal. In the late 1990s, Allied Signal merged with Honeywell. Then Honeywell sold off its consumer auto parts business, Autolite included, to an overseas investment vehicle called the Rank Group. Rank folded it into a subsidiary called the Fram Group. And a few years later, First Brands Group, the Cleveland-based aftermarket roll-up that would eventually own Fram, Raybestos, Cardone, and 20 other names, bought all of it. 6 owners in 52 years, none of them a spark plug company. None of them ran a business that had ever fired a ceramic insulator in a kiln. Meanwhile, in Fostoria, the exact plant the Supreme Court had ordered Ford to divest to preserve Autolite, the workforce was being hollowed out year by year. First layoffs in 2007. In 2011, most spark plug production was quietly relocated to a new factory in Mexicali, Mexico. The Fostoria workforce, once close to 1,400 people, was stripped down to a handful of finishing operations. February 2018, a flooring company called Ropp Holding bought the empty 40-acre, 500,000-square-foot facility for uses unrelated to spark plugs. Then the parent failed. First Brands filed Chapter 11 last fall, $9 billion in liabilities against $12 million in cash. The founder and his brother were indicted on federal charges tied to billions in fake receivables. And then, earlier this year, First Brands quietly announced it was winding down 3 of its brands. Autolite was one of them, no buyer found. The brand the Supreme Court had once bent Section 7 of the Anti-Merger Act to save was quietly shut down inside a bankruptcy by press release. That leaves one question the video's title dodges. The truth underneath it is stranger. The U.S. government killed the possibility of Ford's parts empire before it could exist. And in doing so, it condemned Autolite to a fate that turned out to be worse than being owned by Ford would have been. Ford would have kept making Autolite plugs. Ford needed Autolite plugs. Ford's engineers in Dearborn understood them. The Supreme Court, acting in good faith to preserve competition, saved Autolite from being loved and handed the brand to 50 years of owners who would only ever see it as a line item on a balance sheet. The sentence to keep. In 1972, the Supreme Court of the United States told Ford it couldn't own Autolite because that would kill competition. 54 years later, competition killed Autolite anyway. Next time you pull a spark plug, any brand, take a real look at it. Like that little piece of ceramic and steel is one of the most fought over components in the entire history